The silence that followed the Nobel Committee's call stretched through my parents' dining room like a physical presence. 23 family members, gathered for what was supposed to be my cousin Elena's engagement celebration, stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something approaching terror. My father's fork hung suspended halfway to his mouth. A piece of my mother's famous tres leches cake balanced precariously on the tines. His declaration about my worthless research still echoed in the air, competing with the voice on my phone that had just congratulated me on winning the Nobel Prize in physics. "I'm sorry," I said into the phone, stepping away from the table slightly. "Could you repeat that?" The connection seemed unclear. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unmistakably Swedish. "Dr. Martinez, this is Secretary General Anderson from the Nobel Committee. I'm calling to formally inform you that you have been awarded this year's Nobel Prize in Physics for your groundbreaking work on quantum gravity theory and its applications to understanding dark matter." My mother's wine glass slipped from her fingers, the crystal shattering against her good china plate. The red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood, but nobody moved to clean it up. Everyone was too busy staring at me with the expression of people watching their understanding of reality undergo fundamental reconstruction. "I see," I said calmly into the phone. "I'm honored by the committee's decision." Secretary General Anderson continued with the formal details: the ceremony in Stockholm, the media requirements, the $1 million prize, while my family sat frozen around the dining room table like figures in a very expensive tableau. When I ended the call, the silence was absolute. My father was the first to break. But you're unemployed," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been living in our basement for 2 years working on whatever it is you do on that computer." It was true that I'd been living in my childhood bedroom since completing my postdoctoral fellowship at CERN. What my family didn't understand was that theoretical physics research doesn't require a traditional office. It requires time, computational resources, and the freedom to think about problems that might not have solutions. Living rent-free in my parents' basement had provided exactly the stability I needed to focus on the mathematics that govern the universe's most fundamental mysteries. My sister Carmen, who'd been notably quiet during the evening's earlier discussion of my career failures, was staring at her phone screen with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Miguel," she said slowly, "it says here that Dr. Miguel Martinez is a theoretical physicist who solved the unified field theory problem." She looked up at me. That's you." I nodded. The dark matter calculations took longer than expected, but the mathematics finally worked out last spring. My uncle Roberto, who owned a successful construction company and had spent most of dinner explaining why practical work was more valuable than playing with equations, was reading what appeared to be a news article on his phone. "It says here that your research explains how 95% of the universe works." His voice carried the tone of someone discovering that gravity might actually flow upward. How is that possible? The research had indeed focused on the universe's missing mass, the dark matter and dark energy that comprised most of reality but remained invisible to conventional observation. The mathematical framework I'd developed provided a unified explanation for how these mysterious components interacted with ordinary matter, effectively bridging the gap between quantum mechanics and general relativity that had puzzled physicists for nearly a century. But explaining all of that to people who'd just spent 2 hours discussing my lack of employment seemed somewhat challenging. My cousin Elena, whose engagement we were supposedly celebrating, had apparently forgotten about her own party. "Miguel, I'm looking at your Wikipedia page," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It says you published papers in Physical Review Letters, Nature and Science, and that you've been working on this research since you were a graduate student at MIT. My mother, who'd been advocating for practical employment just minutes earlier, was staring at her phone with the expression of someone watching their fundamental assumptions about reality undergo systematic demolition. "It says here that you have a PhD from MIT and that you did postdoctoral work at CERN." She looked at me with something approaching awe. "When did you go to Switzerland?" "I spent 3 years there," I said simply, "working with the Large Hadron Collider team to test some of the theoretical predictions." The revelation seemed to multiply rather than resolve the family's confusion. My father, who'd been so certain about my research being worthless, was conducting what appeared to be a frantic Google search. "Miguel," he said slowly, "it says here that CERN is where they discovered the Higgs boson. and that you were part of the theoretical team that predicted its properties. I'd actually contributed to the mathematical framework that helped identify the Higgs field's characteristics, but that work had been part of a much larger collaborative effort involving thousands of scientists. The Nobel Prize was being awarded specifically for my subsequent research into dark matter interactions, which had been a more solitary endeavor. Elena was reading what appeared to be a university press release. It says MIT considers you one of their most distinguished alumni, and that your research has been cited over 15,000 times by other scientists. She looked around the table. 15,000 citations means that other researchers are building on your work to advance human knowledge. My cousin David, who'd been explaining earlier why I needed to get serious about life, was scrolling through what appeared to be academic articles. I can't understand any of this, he admitted, but it looks like you've basically rewritten how we understand the universe. The unified field theory had indeed required rethinking some fundamental assumptions about how matter and energy interacted at cosmic scales. The mathematics was elegant in its simplicity, but it had taken 15 years of work to arrive at equations that could explain everything from quantum particle behavior to galactic rotation curves. Roberta was reading what appeared to be a news analysis piece. It says here that your research could lead to revolutionary advances in energy production and space travel. He looked at me with something approaching reverence. Are you going to change how humans live? The practical applications were still theoretical, but the mathematical framework suggested possibilities that had seemed like science fiction just decades earlier. Understanding how dark matter influenced space-time geometry could potentially lead to new forms of propulsion and energy generation, though those engineering challenges would require decades of additional work. My Aunt Sophia, who'd been notably vocal about my need to find steady employment, was reading what appeared to be a financial analysis of Nobel Prize winners. Miguel, she said quietly, it says here that Nobel laureates often become very wealthy through speaking engagements, consulting work, and book deals. She paused. And that the prize comes with $1 million. The money was significant, but it was also secondary to the scientific recognition. The Nobel Prize represented validation from the international physics community that the work had fundamental importance for human understanding of reality. Carmen was reading what appeared to be a biography. It says you started working on unified field theory as a 25-year-old graduate student, and that other physicists thought the problem was unsolvable. She looked at me with something approaching disbelief. You spent 15 years working on something that everyone said was impossible? The impossibility had been part of the appeal. Physics was full of problems that seemed intractable until someone developed the right mathematical tools to address them. Einstein's relativity, quantum mechanics, the Standard Model, all of these breakthrough theories had initially seemed too radical to be correct. My father was reading what appeared to be a timeline of my academic career. Son, he said slowly, it says here that you graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, completed your PhD at MIT in record time, and were recruited by CERN before you turned 30. He looked at me with the expression of someone discovering that their child had been leading a double life. Why didn't you ever tell us any of this? The question was fair. I'd been living in their basement for 2 years, contributing occasionally to household expenses with consulting work, while keeping my research activities largely private. The family had interpreted my quiet lifestyle as evidence of career failure, when in reality I'd been focusing intensively on mathematical problems that required extended periods of uninterrupted thought. Elena found a video interview I'd given to Scientific American the previous year. Miguel, you're explaining quantum gravity like it's basic arithmetic. She looked around the table. I took 2 years of college physics and I can't understand anything you're saying. David was reading what appeared to be a university press release about my research funding. It says here that you've received grants totaling over $8 million from the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the Department of Energy. He looked at me with something approaching awe. That's more money than most people see in their entire lives. The federal funding had been essential for the computational resources needed to test the theoretical predictions. Dark matter research required sophisticated mathematical modeling that pushed the limits of available supercomputing capacity. Sophia was reading what appeared to be a news article about potential Nobel Prize winners. Miguel, it says here that you've been considered a leading candidate for the physics prize for the past 3 years. She looked at me with something between amazement and accusation. Did you know this was coming? The speculation had been flattering but also somewhat distracting. Nobel Prize predictions were notoriously unreliable, and I tried not to pay attention to the annual media coverage of potential winners. The scientific work itself was the reward. The recognition, while meaningful, was secondary to the satisfaction of solving problems that had puzzled humanity for generations. Roberto found a documentary that featured my research. There's a whole section about how unified field theory could revolutionize space exploration and energy production. He looked at me with something approaching reverence. Are you basically helping to build the future? My mother, who'd been advocating for practical employment, was reading what appeared to be an analysis of the physics job market. It says here that theoretical physicists with your credentials typically earn salaries in the high six figures, and that major universities compete aggressively to recruit Nobel laureates. She looked at me with something approaching disbelief. You could probably work anywhere you want. The employment opportunities were indeed extensive, but they were also somewhat irrelevant to the research itself. The mathematics of unified field theory didn't depend on institutional affiliation or salary negotiations. It depended on asking the right questions about how reality was constructed at its most fundamental level. Elena was reading what appeared to be a comparison of Nobel Prize winners by age. Miguel, it says here that you're the youngest physicist to win the prize in over 40 years. She looked around the table. And that your research is considered one of the most important theoretical advances since Einstein's relativity. The comparison to Einstein was generous but not entirely inaccurate. Unified field theory did represent a similar leap in understanding to what relativity had provided in the early 20th century. Both theories required abandoning intuitive assumptions about how reality worked in favor of mathematical descriptions that initially seemed too strange to be true. Carmen found a video of my Nobel Prize announcement. They're calling your work a revolutionary contribution to human understanding of the cosmos, she read aloud, and saying that it fundamentally changes how physicists think about the universe. My father, who'd declared my research worthless less than 30 minutes earlier, was staring at his phone with the expression of someone whose understanding of the world had undergone complete reconstruction. Miguel, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. We all do. The way we talked about your work, your career, we were completely wrong. I considered his words carefully. The family's concern about my employment status hadn't been entirely unreasonable. Theoretical physics was indeed an uncertain career path, and many brilliant researchers struggled to find stable positions. Their criticism had come from a place of caring, even if their understanding of academic research had been somewhat limited. You weren't wrong to be concerned, I said gently. Theoretical physics is a difficult field, and most research doesn't lead to breakthrough discoveries. I was fortunate that the mathematics worked out. Roberto was reading what appeared to be an analysis of the practical implications of my research. It says here that your unified field theory could lead to new forms of energy that make fossil fuels obsolete. He looked at me with something approaching disbelief. Are you going to save the planet? The environmental applications were promising but still decades away from practical implementation. Understanding how dark energy influenced cosmic expansion could potentially lead to new approaches to energy generation, but the engineering challenges remained formidable. David found a news article about the Nobel Prize ceremony. Miguel, it says here that you'll be meeting with the King of Sweden and giving a lecture to the international physics community. He looked at me with something approaching awe. You're going to be famous. The ceremony would indeed involve significant public attention, but that wasn't really the purpose of the research. Physics was about understanding how reality worked, not about achieving celebrity status. The Nobel Prize was meaningful because it represented recognition from the scientific community that the work had contributed something valuable to human knowledge. Sophia was reading what appeared to be a financial analysis of Nobel Prize winners. It says here that Nobel laureates often become very wealthy through consulting work, speaking engagements, and commercial applications of their research. She paused. Miguel, are you going to be rich? The commercial potential was substantial but uncertain. Unified field theory could indeed lead to revolutionary technologies, but the timeline for practical applications was measured in decades rather than years. The immediate value was intellectual rather than financial. We now understood something about the universe that had been mysterious since the beginning of human civilization. My mother approached with the careful expression of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. Miguel, she said quietly, I have to ask. When we would suggest that you needed to find practical work, when we would worry about your future, what were you thinking? The question struck at the heart of the disconnect that had characterized family gatherings for the past several years. While my parents had been concerned about my employment prospects, I'd been focused on mathematical problems that might not have solutions. The research had been all-consuming in the best possible way. Every day brought new insights into how the universe functioned at its most fundamental level. I was usually thinking about dark matter equations, I said honestly. The mathematics required complete focus, and I was fortunate to have the time and space to work without distraction. Elena was reading what appeared to be a timeline of major physics breakthroughs. Miguel, it says here that unified field theory is being compared to Newton's laws of motion and Einstein's relativity. She looked around the table. You've basically made a discovery that will be remembered for centuries. The historical significance was humbling rather than gratifying. Physics advanced through the accumulated work of thousands of researchers building on each other's insights across generations. My contribution had been to develop mathematical tools that could bridge the gap between quantum mechanics and relativity, but that work had only been possible because of the foundation laid by countless previous scientists. Carmen found a video of physicists discussing the implications of my research. They're saying that your work opens up entirely new fields of study and that it will take decades for the physics community to fully explore the implications. She looked at me with something approaching disbelief. You've basically given humanity a new way to understand reality. My father, who'd been so certain about the worthlessness of theoretical research, was reading what appeared to be an explanation of unified field theory written for general audiences. Son, he said slowly, I'm trying to understand what you actually discovered, but the concepts are... He paused, apparently searching for words. Beyond what most people need to think about, I finished. The mathematics describes how matter and energy interact at cosmic scales, but it doesn't have much relevance to daily life. Roberto was reading what appeared to be a news analysis of the Nobel Prize announcement. It says here that your research represents the most significant theoretical advance in physics since the discovery of quantum mechanics. He looked at me with something approaching reverence. How does someone even begin to think about problems like that? The process had been less dramatic than it might sound. Unified field theory had emerged from asking simple questions about why the universe behaved differently at different scales. Why did quantum mechanics work for small particles while relativity described large objects? The mathematics that answered those questions had required years of work, but the underlying curiosity was straightforward. David found an article about the commercial potential of my research. Miguel, it says here that major tech companies and government agencies are already trying to recruit you for consulting work. He paused. And that the patent applications related to your research could be worth billions of dollars. The intellectual property questions were complex but largely irrelevant to the scientific work itself. Unified field theory was a mathematical description of how reality functioned. It belonged to humanity rather than to any individual or organization. Sophia was reading what appeared to be a comparison of Nobel Prize winners' subsequent careers. It says here that Nobel laureates typically become extremely influential in their fields and often advise governments on scientific policy. She looked at me with something approaching awe. You're going to help shape how humanity develops technologically. The policy implications were indeed significant. Understanding how dark matter and dark energy influenced cosmic evolution could inform everything from space exploration strategies to energy research priorities. But those conversations would involve the broader scientific community rather than individual decision-making. My mother, who'd been advocating for practical employment throughout dinner, was staring at a photo of the Nobel Prize medal. Miguel, she said quietly, I have to admit, this is completely beyond anything I imagined was possible. She paused. When you were a child, you were always asking questions about how things worked, but I never thought that it would lead to understanding how the universe works. Elena suggested. She'd apparently become the family's designated interpreter of scientific achievement. The childhood curiosity had indeed been the foundation for everything that followed. Physics was essentially about asking increasingly sophisticated versions of the same questions that children ask naturally. Why do things fall down? Why is the sky blue? Why do stars shine? The mathematics required to answer those questions at a professional level was complex, but the underlying motivation was universal human curiosity. Carmen found a documentary about dark matter research that featured my work. Miguel, they're explaining how your research solves mysteries that have puzzled scientists for decades. She looked around the table. You've basically answered questions about 95% of the universe that no one understood before. The percentage was accurate. Dark matter and dark energy comprised the vast majority of reality, but they'd remained invisible and mysterious until the mathematical framework I'd developed provided a way to understand their behavior. It was satisfying to contribute something meaningful to humanity's understanding of its cosmic context. My father approached with the expression of someone who'd realized that his fundamental assumptions about reality might need revision. Son, he said quietly, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an acknowledgement that I completely misunderstood what you were working on and why it mattered. The misunderstanding had been natural and even reasonable. Theoretical physics research looked like unemployment to people unfamiliar with how scientific breakthroughs actually happened. The work required long periods of apparent inactivity while mathematical concepts developed slowly in the background of consciousness. Roberto was reading what appeared to be an analysis of the economic implications of unified field theory. Miguel, it says here that your research could lead to technological advances that revolutionize transportation, energy production, and space exploration. He looked at me with something approaching disbelief. Are you going to change how humans live in the universe? The technological possibilities were intriguing but remained speculative. Understanding how dark matter influenced space-time geometry could potentially lead to new approaches to propulsion and energy generation, but the engineering challenges would require decades of additional research by teams of scientists and engineers. Elena was reading what appeared to be international reaction to the Nobel Prize announcement. Miguel, it says here that physicists around the world are calling your work a watershed moment for human understanding of reality. She looked at me with something approaching awe. You've basically advanced human civilization. The advancement was collective rather than individual. Unified field theory built on centuries of previous discoveries by thousands of researchers. My contribution had been to develop mathematical tools that could synthesize existing knowledge into a more complete picture. But that work had only been possible because of the foundation laid by the entire scientific community. David found a video of my Nobel Prize acceptance speech rehearsal. Miguel, you're explaining how your research connects to the biggest questions about existence and humanity's place in the cosmos. He looked around the table. You're basically a philosopher of the universe. The philosophical implications were indeed profound. Understanding how matter and energy interacted at cosmic scales inevitably led to questions about consciousness, free will, and the nature of reality itself. Physics had always existed at the intersection of mathematics and metaphysics. My mother, who'd spent dinner advocating for practical employment, was reading what appeared to be predictions about my future career. Miguel, she said slowly, it says here that Nobel Prize winners typically become some of the most influential people in their fields and often serve as advisors to governments and international organizations. The influence was a responsibility rather than a privilege. Scientific understanding carried obligations to help humanity make informed decisions about its future development. The research would be meaningful only if it contributed to human flourishing rather than merely satisfying intellectual curiosity. As the family continued processing this unexpected revelation, I reflected on the strange trajectory that had led from childhood questions about stars to mathematical descriptions of cosmic evolution. The Nobel Prize represented validation from the international physics community, but it also marked the beginning of new responsibilities and challenges. My phone buzzed with another call, this time from the president's science advisor, requesting a briefing on the national security implications of unified field theory. I answered on the second ring. This is Dr. Martinez. The conversation that followed involved classified applications of dark matter research and requests for immediate consultation on federal science policy. As I discussed technical details with government officials, I could see my family listening with the expression of people discovering that their understanding of the world had been fundamentally incomplete. When I ended the call, the dining room was completely silent again. That was the White House, I said simply. My father stared at me for a long moment, then began to laugh. It wasn't bitter laughter or embarrassed laughter. It was the laughter of someone who'd just realized that reality was far more interesting than they'd imagined. Miguel, he said finally, I think we need to have a very different conversation about your career.
Melissa will be a better mother than you ever were, Mark declared, tossing the divorce papers onto our kitchen counter. She's younger, more patient, and the kids already love her. I stood there, gripping my coffee mug so hard my knuckles turned white, but my voice remained steady. Is that what you really think, Mark? My name is Emma Parker, and at 35, I never imagined I'd be standing in my kitchen listening to my husband of 12 years explain why his 26-year-old mistress would be a better mother to our children. The kids need stability, he continued, running his hand through his graying hair. Your constant work trips, the late nights at the hospital, it's not fair to them. Melissa can be there full-time. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me. As an emergency room nurse, I learned to stay calm in crisis situations. This was just another emergency, albeit a personal one. And you think abandoning their mother is stability? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Tell me, Mark, does Melissa know about your plans for my children? He shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his too-tight designer shirt. Another recent change since Melissa entered the picture. Our children, he corrected. And yes, she's excited about being their new mom. She's already looking at houses with better school districts. I set down my mug and pulled out my phone. That's interesting, I said, scrolling through my files. Because that's not what she told her friend Jessica last week at the cafe. Mark's face flickered with uncertainty. What are you talking about? You see, Mark, when our daughter Emily came home 3 months ago talking about Daddy's special friend who bought her ice cream, I started paying attention. And when our son Tyler mentioned that Melissa promised him a new gaming system if he kept their mall trips a secret, I started recording. I pressed play on my phone, and Melissa's voice filled our kitchen. God, no, I don't want his kids. They're so annoying, especially the little one. But Mark's loaded, and once we're married, I'll convince him to send them to boarding school or something. His wife's too busy saving lives or whatever to fight for custody. Mark's face drained of color. That's not real. You're making this up. I played another recording. Yeah, babe, Emma works tonight, Mark's voice this time. We can use the house. The kids are at my mother's. No, don't worry about them. Once the divorce is final, we'll figure something out. You won't have to deal with them much, I promise. There's more, I said calmly, watching his facade crumble. Like your conversation about using my work schedule against me in custody proceedings. Or Melissa's detailed plans for spending my children's college funds on her lifestyle business. Would you like to hear those too? Mark slumped against the counter, his arrogance deflating. How did you? I'm a mother, Mark. I pay attention. And while you were busy planning your new life with Melissa, I was protecting our children. Emma, we can talk about this, he started, but I cut him off. Oh, we will talk about this. Tomorrow with my lawyer. She's very interested in these recordings, especially the parts where you and Melissa discuss hiding assets before filing for divorce. I picked up the divorce papers he'd thrown at me. By the way, your mother called yesterday. Apparently, Emily told her about Melissa's promise to get rid of that old nurse so she could be their new mommy. Your mother was disturbed. Mark's face had taken on a sickly pallor. His mother, a former family court judge, had always been our biggest supporter. The thought of her knowing about his plans seemed to hit him harder than anything else. The kids, he began weakly, are staying with me, I finished firmly. And if you try to fight this, every recording goes public. I wonder how your medical practice partners would feel about their respected colleague plotting to abandon his children. I gathered my things, preparing for my hospital shift. You have until tomorrow to decide, Mark. Either we handle this civilly with joint custody and fair division of assets, or everyone learns exactly what kind of father you really are. As I walked toward the door, I turned back one last time. Oh, and Mark. Melissa's been seeing her ex-boyfriend Jason on the side. There's a recording of that too, if you're interested. I left him standing in our kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of his carefully constructed plans. My hands were shaking as I got into my car, but my mind was clear. I'd spent 3 months gathering evidence, protecting my children, and preparing for this moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark's mother. I'm so sorry, Emma. I've already called my lawyer friend. We'll make sure the kids are safe. Another buzz, this time from the hospital. Multiple vehicle accident incoming. All hands needed. I took a deep breath, put my phone away, and started the car. I had patients to save, children to protect, and a future to secure. Mark and Melissa's plans for my family were about to unravel. and I have front row seats to watch it all fall apart. As I drove to work, I thought about my children safely staying with my sister for the weekend. They had no idea their world was about to change, but I'd make sure they came through it stronger. After all, that's what mothers do. We protect our own, even when it means fighting the people we once trusted most. The night shift ahead would be busy, but I was used to handling emergencies. And compared to the crisis I just navigated at home, a multiple vehicle accident seemed almost straightforward. At least in the ER, I knew exactly who my enemies were. The next morning hit me like a freight train. After a grueling 12-hour shift dealing with the accident victims, I'd walked into my lawyer's office running on nothing but coffee and determination. Sarah, my lawyer and longtime friend, was already reviewing the recordings when I arrived. "These are gold, Emma," she said, looking up from her laptop. "The part where they discuss hiding assets, that's going to make this very easy." I sank into the leather chair across from her desk, exhaustion seeping into my bones. "Mark hasn't stopped calling since last night. 27 missed calls." "Let him sweat," Sarah replied, pulling out a thick folder. "His mother called me this morning. She's willing to testify about Melissa's interactions with the kids if needed. Apparently, she's been keeping her own records." A knock on the door interrupted us. Mark stood there, looking disheveled in yesterday's clothes. The smug businessman facade had crumbled, replaced by something closer to panic. "Emma, please," he started, but Sarah cut him off. "Mr. Parker, if you want to speak with my client, you'll need to do it through proper legal channels." He ignored her, his eyes fixed on me. "The recordings, Melissa says they're fake. She wouldn't say those things about our kids." I pulled out my phone, too tired for games. "Would you like to hear the one from last Tuesday, when she told Emily that mommy doesn't love her enough to stay home?" Mark's face crumpled. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't?" I agreed. "Because you were too busy planning your new life to notice what was happening to your children. Did you know Tyler's grades have dropped? That Emily's been having nightmares?" Sarah cleared her throat. "Mr. Parker, we have a proposed settlement agreement prepared. I suggest you review it with your lawyer." I watched as Mark skimmed the documents, his face growing paler with each page. Joint custody, but primary physical custody would be mine. The house would stay in my name. The children's college funds would be placed in a protected trust. "This is everything," he whispered. "You're taking everything." "No, Mark," I corrected him. "I'm protecting everything. Our children, their future, their stability. The things you were willing to sacrifice for Melissa." His phone buzzed. The look on his face as he read the message told me everything I needed to know. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "Melissa's not happy about the recordings." He slumped into a chair. She's leaving. Says this is too much drama. That I promised her an easy divorce and comfortable life. Not this." Sarah handed him a pen. "The settlement, Mr. Parker. Either sign it now or we take this to court with all the evidence." As he reached for the pen, another knock echoed through the office. This time, it was Mark's mother, Patricia, her silver hair immaculate as always, her expression carved from stone. "I thought I'd find you here," she said to Mark. "The hospital board would like to speak with you. Something about ethical concerns regarding your recent behavior?" Mark's head snapped up. "Mom, you didn't." "I didn't have to," Patricia cut in. "Emily told her pediatrician about Melissa's promises and threats. The doctor, being a mandated reporter, felt obligated to inform the relevant parties." I watched as the last pieces of Mark's world crumbled around him. His carefully constructed plans, his dreams of a fresh start with Melissa, his reputation, all of it falling apart in this small office. He signed the papers without another word. As he stood to leave, Patricia blocked his path. "One more thing," she said, her voice ice cold. "I've spoken with Emily's therapist. We've documented every interaction between Melissa and the children. If either of you come near them without proper supervision, the recordings won't be your only problem." After they left, I finally let the tears come. Sarah pushed a box of tissues across her desk, giving me a moment to collect myself. "You did good, Emma," she said softly. "The kids are safe. That's what matters." My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Kids are asking about pancakes for dinner. Coming home soon." Through my tears, I smiled. Pancakes for dinner, our family's traditional comfort food. Tonight, we need it. "Just one more thing," Sarah said as I gathered my things. "The hospital board, they're not just concerned about Mark. They're impressed with how you handled everything while maintaining your professional responsibilities. The head nurse mentioned something about a promotion. I paused at the door, thinking about the future stretching out before us. It wouldn't be easy. Divorce never is, especially with children involved. But we would face it together, my children and I, with pancakes for dinner and the truth as our shield. First pancakes, I said. Then we'll talk about the future. 6 months later, I stood in our redecorated living room, watching Emily and Tyler help each other with homework. The changes in them were subtle but significant. Emily's nightmares had stopped, and Tyler's grades were back up. Sometimes the best medicine is simply truth and stability. Mark had stuck to the custody agreement, though his visits became less frequent after Melissa publicly moved in with her ex-boyfriend Jason. The children's initial confusion had given way to understanding, helped along by their weekly sessions with Dr. Martinez, their therapist. "Mom," Tyler called out, looking up from his math homework. "Can we have pancakes tonight?" I smiled, remembering that first night after the lawyer's office. Pancakes had become our symbol of resilience, a reminder that we could make something sweet out of life's bitter moments. "Sure, buddy. But first, I have some news to share with both of you." They looked up expectantly. Emily's dark hair fell across her face, so much like her father's, but her determined expression was all mine. "Remember how I've been working extra shifts lately?" They nodded. "Well, it's because the hospital offered me a new position. I'll be the emergency department's clinical coordinator." "Does that mean more work?" Tyler asked, his forehead creasing with worry. "Actually, it means more regular hours. I'll be home most evenings, and we'll have more weekends together." Emily's face lit up. "Really? No more overnight shifts?" "Very few," I promised, "and Aunt Jessica will still help out when needed." The promotion had come as a surprise, though Patricia, who still served on the hospital board, later admitted she'd spoken highly of my professional conduct during the divorce. Sometimes, handling personal crises with grace has unexpected professional benefits. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Kids still on for this weekend?" I replied with a simple yes, our communication now limited to logistics about the children. It wasn't ideal, but it was peaceful, and peace was what we needed. Later that evening, as we gathered around the kitchen island making pancakes, the doorbell rang. Patricia stood there, holding a familiar box. "I found these while cleaning out my attic," she said, setting the box on our counter. "I thought the children might want to see them." Inside were photo albums from when Mark and I were first married, when the kids were babies. Pictures of happier times, before ambition and selfishness tore our family apart. "You're still family," Patricia said quietly, watching the kids flip through the albums. "What my son did, it doesn't change that." She became an unexpected ally, ensuring the children maintained a connection to their father's family while fiercely protecting them from Melissa's influence. Last month, when Melissa tried to contact Tyler through social media, Patricia had handled it before I even knew about it. As we shared pancakes and memories, I realized we created something new from the ashes of my marriage, not a broken family, but a reconstructed one, stronger in its repaired places. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sarah. "Final paperwork filed. It's officially over." I excused myself for a moment, needing space to absorb this milestone. Standing in my bedroom, now painted a peaceful blue instead of the beige Mark had insisted on, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked different. Stronger. More myself. The sound of laughter drifted up from the kitchen. Emily was telling Patricia about her science project, Tyler adding his own commentary between bites of pancake. This was our reality now, and it was a good one. I rejoined them, sliding back into my seat as Tyler began explaining his latest video game strategy to his grandmother. Patricia caught my eye and smiled, a look of understanding passing between us. "More pancakes, Mom?" Emily asked, holding up the spatula. "Yes," I said, watching my daughter carefully flip the pancake, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "I'd love some." Life wasn't perfect. It never is. But as I sat there with my children and their grandmother, sharing pancakes and planning weekend adventures, I knew we'd found our way to something better than perfect. We'd found our truth, our strength, and most importantly, our peace. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. Mark and Melissa could have their drama and schemes. We had pancakes, homework, and love. In the end, we got the better deal. "She's dangerous, officer. Look at these bruises." My mother-in-law, Eleanor, held out her arm dramatically, showing off what looked like fresh bruises. I stood in our doorway, utterly stunned as two police officers took notes while she sobbed convincingly. My name is Olivia Parker, and at 34, I was watching my mother-in-law try to destroy my life with perfectly crafted lies. Mrs. Parker, we need you to come down to the station, one of the officers said, his face stern. I nodded numbly, my mind racing to understand how I'd ended up here. Just yesterday, everything had been normal, or what passed for normal in a house I shared with my husband James, and unfortunately, his mother. I'll get my purse, I said calmly, turning to go back inside. That's when I saw it. Eleanor's phone lying on the kitchen counter, its screen still lit up. As I passed by, a message notification caught my eye. Perfect timing. James is at work, and the police bought everything. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. Eleanor had always been careless with her passwords, using the same one for everything. James's birthday. One quick swipe, and I was in. The message was from a group chat titled Operation Homecoming. Time seemed to slow as I scrolled through the messages, my heart pounding with each revelation. There it was, weeks of conversations between Eleanor and my sister-in-law Victoria, meticulously planning every detail. Once the abuse claims stick, James will have to choose between us and her. The house will be ours, and that little gold digger will be gone for good. Eleanor had written just 3 days ago. Perfect, Victoria had replied. I've already started telling everyone how worried I am about her mental state. Nobody will believe her when she tries to defend herself. The timestamps showed they'd been planning this for months. Every accidental bruise Eleanor had shown up with, every concerned call from Victoria about my supposed unstable behavior, it was all orchestrated. I quickly took photos of the chat with my own phone, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Thank God for my job as a digital forensic specialist. I knew exactly how to document everything without leaving traces. Mrs. Parker. The officer called from the door. We need to go now. Coming. I called back, setting Eleanor's phone exactly where I'd found it. As I walked past her, I saw the triumphant gleam in her eyes, the slight upturn of her lips that anyone else would have missed. She thought she'd won. What Eleanor didn't know was that 3 months ago, I'd installed security cameras throughout our house. Not because I was paranoid, but because James had been worried about recent break-ins in the neighborhood. Every incident Eleanor had reported was captured on video, showing exactly how she created those bruises when she thought no one was watching. At the police station, I sat calmly as they questioned me. Mrs. Parker, these are serious allegations. Your mother-in-law has documented several instances of abuse. I understand, I replied, maintaining my composure. I'd like to contact my lawyer now. Eleanor's plan had one fatal flaw. She'd never bothered to learn what I did for a living. As a digital forensic specialist, I spent my days helping companies protect themselves from cyber threats and document digital evidence. I knew exactly how to build an airtight case. My lawyer, Patricia Jean, arrived within the hour. I'd worked with her firm on several cases, and she knew my reputation for meticulous documentation. As we sat in the interview room, I pulled out my phone. Before we continue, Patricia said, my client has some evidence she'd like to share. The officers looked skeptical until I started playing the videos. There was Eleanor, carefully applying makeup to create bruises. Another clip showed her practicing her crying in the bathroom mirror. But the piece de resistance was the audio from last week, when she called Victoria to gloat about how well their plan was working. The timestamps and metadata are all intact, I explained professionally. I can provide a full forensic report demonstrating these files haven't been altered. The officers exchanged glances. Why do you have these recordings, Mrs. Parker? Home security, I replied simply. After the break-ins on our street, we installed cameras. All residents were notified, including Eleanor. She signed the acknowledgement form herself. I watched their expressions shift from suspicion to realization. Eleanor had walked right into her own trap, and she didn't even know it yet. There's more, I added, pulling up the photos of the group chat. This is a conversation between my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, detailing their plan to frame me for abuse and take my house. As the officers reviewed the evidence, I thought about James. He was at work, probably worried sick after Eleanor's frantic call about her abusive daughter-in-law. He had no idea his mother and sister had been manipulating him for months, playing on his protective instincts to turn him against me. Mrs. Parker, the senior officer said finally, We'll need copies of all this evidence. And we'd owe you an apology. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead to the next steps. Eleanor and Victoria thought they were so clever, but they'd never faced someone who knew how to fight back on their own turf. The digital trail they'd left would be their undoing. As I left the police station that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor to the family group chat. Olivia's been taken in for questioning. It's only a matter of time now. Keep James busy. He doesn't need to know the details yet. I smiled, thinking of the security cameras silently recording at home, capturing every moment of Eleanor's performance. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back immediately. It's letting your opponents think they're winning while you gather everything you need to take them down completely. The real show was about to begin, and I had front row seats to their downfall. The next morning, I woke up in our guest bedroom to find several missed calls from James. I'd chosen not to go home last night, letting Eleanor think her plan was working. Instead, I'd stayed busy, compiling all my evidence into an airtight case. "Olivia, where are you? Mom's hysterical, saying you threatened her after the police let you go. Please call me back." James's voice message was tense, worried. He still believed his mother's act. I closed my eyes, remembering how we'd met 5 years ago. James had been different then, before Eleanor moved in with us temporarily after her divorce. Before Victoria started visiting more frequently, always whispering in his ear about how I was changing, becoming unstable. My phone buzzed with a new notification from the security system. Eleanor was in the kitchen, talking to Victoria, who'd apparently come over first thing in the morning. I opened the live feed. "Everything's going perfectly," Eleanor was saying, stirring her coffee. "James is devastated. Completely believes you about Olivia's mental state. Once she's gone, we can sell this place and get something bigger, just the three of us." Victoria nodded eagerly. "And with her history of abuse, she won't get a penny in the divorce. I can't believe how easy this was." I smiled, watching them celebrate prematurely. They had no idea I'd already sent everything to my lawyer. Patricia was probably filing the restraining orders right now. My phone rang. James again. This time I answered. "Where are you?" he demanded. "Mom's pressing charges, Olivia. She says you came back last night and threatened her. Victoria saw everything." "Did she?" I kept my voice calm. "That's interesting because I have proof of exactly where I was last night. But more importantly, I have proof of something else. Check your email, James. I just sent you something you need to see." I'd spent hours compiling the evidence into a clear, chronological presentation. The security footage, the group chat messages, audio recordings of their planning sessions, everything pointing to a calculated conspiracy. "What is this?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "The truth," I replied simply. "Watch it all, James. Then we'll talk." I hung up and opened my laptop, checking the security feed again. Eleanor and Victoria were still in the kitchen, but now they were checking their phones frantically. My lawyer must have sent the cease and desist letters. She couldn't have proof, Victoria was saying, her voice shrill. We were so careful. Eleanor's face had gone pale. "The cameras. The ones they installed for security. You don't think?" "Those cameras can't record audio," Victoria snapped. "And anyway, we only talked in the garden or my house." I smiled again. They didn't know about the garden cameras or the fact that their phones had been automatically connecting to my home's Wi-Fi, backing up their conversations to my secure server. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Restraining orders granted. Police are on their way to serve them now." Perfect timing. On the security feed, I watched as 2 police officers approached our front door. Eleanor answered, her usual confident smile faltering as they handed her the papers. "This is ridiculous," she screeched. "She's lying. Victoria, tell them." But Victoria was backing away, her face ashen as she read the documents. The officers were explaining that they had evidence of their conspiracy, including the false police report from yesterday. Both women would need to leave the premises immediately. James's car pulled into the driveway. He looked shell-shocked as he got out, probably still processing everything I'd sent him. I watched through the cameras as he walked in, looking between his mother, sister, and the police officers. "Is it true?" he asked Eleanor, his voice hollow. "Did you and Victoria plan all this? Try to frame my wife?" "James, honey, you don't understand," Eleanor started, reaching for him. "We were trying to protect you. She's changed you, taking you away from your family." The only ones trying to destroy this family are you and Victoria, he replied, stepping back from her touch. I saw the videos, Mom. I heard your conversations. How could you do this? That was my cue. I gathered my things and drove home, arriving just as the police were escorting Eleanor and Victoria out. They froze when they saw me, their faces a mix of fury and fear. You! Eleanor spat. You planned this. I smiled calmly. No, Eleanor, you planned this. I just made sure everyone could see exactly what you were doing. As they were led away, James stood in the doorway, looking lost. I walked past him into our house, setting my bag down in the entryway that had witnessed so much drama in the past 24 hours. Olivia, he started, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I should have seen what they were doing. I should have believed in you. I turned to face him, feeling both stronger and more tired than I had in months. Yes, you should have. But right now, we both need time to process this. I'll be staying in the guest room until we figure things out. He nodded, understanding that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. As I walked upstairs, I checked my phone one last time. Patricia had sent another update. Eleanor and Victoria were being charged with filing false police reports, conspiracy, and harassment. Their perfect plan had backfired spectacularly. In the guest room, I sat on the bed and finally let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The hurt, the anger, the vindication. It all washed over me in waves, but underneath it all was a sense of peace. I protected myself, exposed the truth, and done it all without stooping to their level. Tomorrow would bring me challenges, healing my marriage, dealing with the legal aftermath, rebuilding trust. But for now, I could rest knowing that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth come to light. 6 months after Eleanor and Victoria's failed scheme, I sat in our newly renovated living room, sipping coffee and reviewing the final court documents. The criminal case against them had concluded with both women accepting plea deals, probation, mandatory counseling, and restraining orders that would keep them far from our lives. The house felt different now. We repainted every room, replaced the furniture Eleanor had chosen, and transformed the space into something that was truly ours again. The security cameras remained, though now they were just part of our home's protection rather than silent witnesses to manipulation. James and I had spent these months in therapy, both individually and as a couple. He'd moved into the guest room initially, understanding that trust needed to be rebuilt slowly. We had long, difficult conversations about family loyalty, boundaries, and why he'd been so quick to believe his mother's lies. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, he said one evening during dinner. The way they'd whisper when you left the room, how Mom would constantly remind me of how she sacrificed everything for me. I was so blind. I reached across the table and took his hand. We both learned valuable lessons. I learned to speak up sooner, and you learned that sometimes the people closest to us can be the ones who hurt us most. The hardest part had been dealing with the extended family. Eleanor and Victoria had spent years crafting their narrative about me, and some relatives still weren't sure what to believe. But as more details emerged during the court proceedings, including the full extent of their plotting, support slowly shifted in our favor. My sister-in-law's teenage daughter, Lily, had reached out to me privately. I always knew something was wrong with how Mom and Grandma treated you, she confessed. I found Mom's burner phone once with all these notes about their plans. I was too scared to say anything. I'd hugged her tight, assuring her that none of it was her responsibility. Now she visited us regularly, finding in our home the stability her own mother couldn't provide. One afternoon, while sorting through old photos, I found a picture from our wedding day. Eleanor stood between James and me, her smile now obviously forced. Victoria was on his other side, already plotting perhaps. I started to toss it away, but James stopped me. Keep it, he said softly, as a reminder of how far we've come. He was right. We were stronger now, more united. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy us had ultimately forced us to confront the cracks in our foundation and rebuild something better. Last week, we received a letter from Eleanor's counselor, part of her probation requirements. She'd written us an apology, though it still rang hollow with justifications and excuses. Victoria hadn't bothered to write at all, apparently still convinced she'd done nothing wrong. Some people never change, my therapist observed when I shared this with her. But you've changed, grown stronger. That's what matters. She was right. The woman I was before would have kept quiet, tried to accommodate Eleanor's increasingly outrageous behavior, doubted herself when Victoria spread rumors about my mental state. But I'd learned to stand my ground, to trust my instincts, and to fight back intelligently rather than emotionally. James and I finally moved back into our master bedroom last month. As we lay there one night, he turned to me in the darkness. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For fighting for us, even when I didn't deserve it. For being smarter and stronger than them. For giving me a chance to make things right." I snuggled closer to him, feeling truly at peace in our home for the first time in years. We fought for us. That's what matters now. This morning, I disabled the security system's constant recording feature. We still have cameras for safety, but I no longer feel the need to document every moment. The threat has passed, and we've emerged stronger on the other side. Eleanor and Victoria's plan to take our home have failed spectacularly, but they'd unintentionally given us something valuable, a chance to rebuild our marriage on a stronger foundation of trust, understanding, and mutual respect. As I sit here now, watching the sunset through windows no longer clouded by tension and fear, I realize that sometimes the happy ending isn't about winning the battle. It's about growing stronger through the fight. Our home isn't just a house anymore. It's a testament to resilience, truth, and the power of standing your ground when others try to tear you down. James comes home from work, bringing takeout and a warm smile. We've started having dinner together every night, talking openly about our days, our feelings, our future. It's a simple thing, but it represents everything we almost lost and fought so hard to save. "Happy?" he asks, setting the food down. I look around our home, remembering the darkness we emerged from, and smile. "Yes," I reply, "we are."